What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here with Darium's Competitive Pokemon. Today, I'm going to be going over my 4th place Buzzwole Lycanroc GX deck from the Memphis Regional Championships. I literally just got home from it last night, and it was a crazy weekend. This was the biggest regional championship of all times. There were like just under 1,000 masters competing for the top spot. It was a wild weekend. I just did a vlog about it, so you could check the channel. If you have not seen the vlog, you get to kind of hear a rundown of how a lot of my matchups went and what kind of decks I played against in the vlog there. But here I'm going to be going over my specific card choices with the deck, also showing off this beautiful playmat that I won, as well as the 4th place trophy. If anybody's interested in just seeing that, this is the first piece of hardware that I've won since I've been working at Darium, so pretty cool. I get to show off this stuff to you guys as well. This is actually the second semifinalist trophy that I've gotten from a regional championship. However, the first one that I won back in like 2014, I ended up selling it because back in 2014 there was not a lot of money in the Pokemon trading card game, and I just used to pawn off everything that I won there, including the trophy. So I think I sold it for like $30 on eBay or something. Now that there's more prize money in the game, I think I got like $1,500 or something for my top 4 finish, which is pretty sweet. I don't need to pawn off all the little things that I win, so that's pretty cool. I've actually been thinking about doing a Patreon where I give some of my winnings away, something like that, where like one of the incentives is like monthly raffles, something like that, where I give away all the swag that I get from tournaments. But we'll see about that down the line. For now, I want to get to this deck list. Really excited about this deck list. I think that this is the best version of Buzzwole Lycanroc that you can run. I know that might sound a little bit confident on my side, but I really thought that this was one of, if not the best deck in the room. I played against Michael Pramawatt twice at the tournament and ended up beating him both times. Played against Pablo head to head, and we actually ended up tying, but it was a very close series that I was gonna run away with it, but he ended up cornering me into a tie just on the last turn of the game. Cornered my Buzzwole that had just knuckle impacted, and I couldn't retreat to my benched Buzzwole to knuckle impact for my final prize. I had to find a Guzma off an N, and I couldn't do it. So pretty close series versus him as well. I was confident in almost every single one of my matchups, except for just a very close matchup with Azul, who has ended up taking me down with that Golisopod Garbodor deck. Very close games versus Azul as well. Came down to the wire in a final top deck for game on Azul's part. But congrats to him. Congrats to Mike Pramawatt. Amazing tournament all around. That was a completely nuts top 8. There was just a lot of really good players there. And, I'm just honored to be able to, participate in the tournament and just, top 4 finish. Really excited about that as well. Just such a big crowd. And just, that this deck was able to perform, to my expectations. I thought this deck was really good for a long time, and I was excited to see the performance back that up. So this is my list. It's very similar to the list that ended up finishing in the top 8 of the European International Championships, but it does have some key differences that I'm going to be going over as well. First of all, we start off with 3 copies of Buzzwole GX. You can see that I'm playing the different arts. I actually just got a Rainbow Rare art too. I like playing mismatching arts. I felt like 3 copies of Buzzwole GX was just fine. You don't really need the 4th, especially with the Rescue Stretcher in the deck. 1 copy of Zygarde EX. 2 copies of Lycanroc GX, and 2 copies of the Corner Rockruff. Now there is another option for Rockruff that we could play as well that we'll talk about in a little bit. We have 2 copies of Octillery and 2 of the Ion Pool Remoraid's, 1 Regirock, 2 Tapu Lele, and that's it for the Pokemon. So let's talk about these guys real quick. First of all, like I said, Buzzwole GX, this is your main attacker in the deck. Now, some lists have gone as far as to play 4 copies of Buzzwole, but I don't really think that's super necessary. We do play a Rescue Stretcher. I mean, you're just never going to use 4 copies of Buzzwole, and really, you don't really ever really need to use 3. Most games, 2 copies of Buzzwole is just fine, especially since we're going to be attacking with Lycanroc in most circumstances as well. Now, in some matchups, 3 Buzzwole can get a little sketchy, especially if you prize one and one gets damaged early. Then it can be a little hairy, but If one gets knocked out early, you can always just rescue stretcher it back, so it's never really that much of a problem. The biggest argument for Buzzwole GX would just be that it increases your odds of starting it, but basically my fourth copy of Buzzwole GX turned into this Zygarde EX. I decided that one copy of Zygarde EX would be much more useful than a fourth copy of Buzzwole, and throughout the tournament, I never missed that fourth copy of Buzzwole. With 3 copies of Buzzwole GX and 3 Floatstone that you'll see later in the deck, you can always get Buzzwole into the active early. I pretty much, never really had an issue with it, especially since getting Buzzwole into the active on turn 1 is only a priority if you're going second. I mean, most of the time, you're perfectly okay just starting with the Buzzwole on the bench, maybe using Brooklet Hill or Ultra Ball to get your Buzzwole. Starting Buzzwole on the bench is not a problem because then you can max Elixir to it, and then maybe you don't even want to attack until turn 2 anyway because you're just going to go for a turn 2 Knuckle Impact instead of a turn 1 Jet Punch. And sometimes, depending on the deck, that's going to be your strategy. So 3 copies of Buzzwole, perfectly fine. I think it's more than enough, and you see the card plenty often, and you can still be very aggressive. You get the turn 1 Buzzwole plenty versus the decks that you need to. Now, I swapped the 4th copy of Buzzwole for a Zygarde EX. I had originally cut the Zygarde EX and the little Zygarde. You can see I'm playing no copies of those non-EX, non-GX Pokemon. I had originally cut those all together because I did not like them in the deck. But as I was playing, I was testing against Zoroark Lycanroc GX with Mewtwo. Now, a lot of those Zoroark Lycanroc decks are playing the Mewtwo from Evolutions. Michael Pramawat did not play it and ended up winning the whole tournament, beating Pablo en route to do so. So, maybe he is showing that you don't necessarily need it if you get a little lucky. I think even Michael would say that the matchup is not great for him. But I would argue that, Mewtwo doesn't always really help anyways. Zygarde EX is an answer to Mewtwo in those Zoroark Lycanroc decks just because you could safely power up a Zygarde EX. Lance Pulse easily knocks out Zorua's. Cellstorm can go as far as to knock out Zoroark GX in one hit, just for 2 energy, which is insane. So if you can knock out Zoroark GX with Cellstorm, if you have a strong energy and a choice band, that Cellstorm is going to be doing 210 damage. Not 210, 110 damage times 2, 220 damage to a Zoroark GX. And then a Mewtwo can't even really punish it. A Mewtwo could do 90 damage to it with a Choice Band, and most of those Zoroark Lycanroc decks are only playing like 2 copies of Choice Band. So more than likely, it's going to just be doing a measly 60 damage if the Mewtwo is out to attack this Zygarde. There's really no good answer to it. So the Zygarde can just totally wreak havoc on that Lycanroc deck, especially since Cellstorm and Lance Pulse can both also knock out a Rockruff that has an energy on it. Since you always see their Dangerous Rogue GX play coming from a mile away, you can safely go out with Zygarde EX, Cellstorm, or Lance Pulse, a Rockruff that has an energy on it, and you could really tear up like half their team with this thing, and they don't really have a valid option to counter it, especially if you've limited your own bench, which is really important when playing against other Lycanroc GX decks. And Parallel City, which I also play, really helps you do that as well. So Zygarde EX felt like it was a nice option just to be able to answer Mewtwo. I mean, Zygarde can knock out Mewtwo in one hit if you have 2 strongs on it, or a strong and a Regirock in play with Landswrath. Cellstorm is also just a good option for hitting into a Mewtwo and then maybe cleaning it up with Jet Punch later. If you have 2 strongs on it or something like that, you could Cellstorm for 100 and then clean it up with Jet Punch later in the game. I just really like the option of having Zygarde. It also has 190 hit points, and it didn't really get in the way. I just think it's more valuable than the 4th Buzzwole. Is the Zygarde absolutely necessary? No, but I think it is more necessary than a 4th Buzzwole, and I will stand by my decision there. We also play a 2-2 Lycanroc GX line. Now, Lycanroc GX is the all-star of this deck. It really makes this deck much more aggressive. That Bloodthirsty Eyes ability, just being able to bring up any of your opponent's benched Pokemon on evolution, is so good. Makes it so that Jet Punch can target down any of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Like I said, if your opponent's got a Rockruff on the bench with an energy on it or something like that, you can easily Bloodthirsty Eyes, bring it into the active position, and then knock it out with Jet Punch. Also, Lycanroc GX insanely useful for Dangerous Rogue. I cannot tell you how often I use Dangerous Rogue GX and Claw Slash throughout the course of the tournament. There are plenty of times where I would Dangerous Rogue GX for huge damage, just 2 energy attachments at any point in the game. When you put just a basic energy onto a Rockruff, you're setting up a power play for later. You can then go ahead, attach another one, bring up whatever you want with Bloodthirsty Eyes, then Dangerous Rogue it. If your opponent has 4 benched Pokemon, that's 200 damage. If you have a strong energy, that's 220. Choice Band, that's 250. It can easily add up to just insane amounts of damage. Even if your opponent is trying to be conservative, maybe they only have 3 benched Pokemon or something like that, with strong energy and Choice Band, it can add up very quickly. So Lycanroc GX, just an awesome attacker. Claw Slash can even get there to finish off Lele's and things like that. Let's take a look at Claw Slash real quick. That 110 can easily turn into 140 with a Choice Band, and then with a strong, that's 160. With the Regirock, that's 170. I did finish off some games by knocking out Tapu Lele with Claw Slash. I mean, it happens easier than you would think, and is an excellent option after you've Dangerous Rogued a big threat. Rockruff. Now, we do play 2 of these Rockruffs, and there are a couple different Rockruffs to choose from. I chose to play the 2 corner Rockruffs just because, well, first of all, it's the only one that I had, but I did think that corner was a good option too. Like I said, I played a mirror against Pablo, and he ended up actually using corner to stop me from being able to retreat for game. So, like, that was pretty significant. If Pablo was playing the other version of Rockruff, it would have been very annoying. Now, I do think that there is an argument to be said for the promo Rockruff. I actually have a copy right here. It has some attacks. So with a strong energy, you could tackle for 30, which is enough to be able to knock out a Zorua. So that's kind of cool, on one turn where you just feel like poking a Zorua or something like that, you can knock out a Zorua with the Rockruff. And since we don't play any non-EX or non-GX attackers, like, this could act as like your non-EX, non-GX trade, just being able to poke a Zorua or something like that. Also, this Rockruff can actually take down a Hoopa. This deck does not have any answers to non-EX or to, like, the barrier Pokemon. It doesn't really have any answers to Pokemon like Hoopa or Alolan Ninetales. This Rockruff can, with 2 strongs, you can actually knock out a Hoopa, do 60 times 2, 120 damage. So that's pretty significant as well. Just something to think about as an option. I did just pick up a playset of those promo Rockruffs just so that I had the option, but I do think that corner is very good and is a valid option. You definitely don't need to play the promo Rockruffs. As you can see by both me and Pablo, who finished in the top 4, did not play them. We do have a 2-2 Octillery line as well. Octillery is the all-star of this deck, and it's part of what makes this deck just so good, because you go up on prizes very quickly with Buzzwole and Lycanroc being able to target down your opponent's Pokemon. You're going to want to set up Octillery fast so that you can continue to use Abyssal Hand, draw through your deck, make sure you hit cards like Max Elixirs and Guzma. After you start using Knuckle Impact, you're going to need to be able to mill through your deck to continue to hit your copies of Guzma so that you can reset your Buzzwole and use Knuckle Impact again. On turns where you hit back-to-back Knuckle Impact on big threats, you usually end up winning those games, and Octillery helps you execute that strategy, so it's very important. We also have 1 copy of Regirock. This is the Regirock EX with that Regi Power ability, increasing your damage output from fighting Pokemon by 10. I saw some people ask, do I think I need 2 copies of Regirock EX? Definitely not. 1 copy was just fine. In fact, I think 2 copies is just a little overkill. There weren't any numbers that I felt like I was whiffing all weekend. I felt like I was hitting every number that I needed to, most of the time without Regirock. In fact, sometimes I needed the Regirock. I did, and so 1 copy was fine, but I never felt like I needed 2. And sometimes you don't need it at all. Like, I never was in a situation where the Regirock was prized or something and I needed it. Like, that just never really occurred. The only time I really found myself needing the Regirock was with a turn 1 Jet Punch for 50, and then you want to turn it into 60 damage so that you can knock out things like Rockruff or Ralts or, Beldum, little Pokemon that have 60 hit points, Rowlets, things like that. Regirock helps you hit that 60 damage just because you don't play Fighting Fairy Belt. We play Choice Band in here, here. So Regirock helps fix that number. So I really do like that for Regirock. But otherwise, Regirock is kind of just a nice little option to have if you happen to be 10 short. It's also cool because it helps your Zygarde EX knock out Zoroark GXs as well, just since the 10 plus from Regirock doubles the amount of damage you're doing to a Zoroark. It's plus 20 to a Zoroark GX, since Zoroark GX is weak to fighting. So it helps your Buzzwoles do more damage to a Zoroark GX, helps your Zygarde do more damage to a Zoroark GX. But other than that, it's not the most necessary card in the world, but I do think 1 is very important just for being able to hit 60 on those early basic Pokemon, even Remoraid, things like that. Now, we do play 2 copies of Tapu Lele as well. I saw some lists playing only 1 copy of Tapu Lele. I think 2 copies is great just because this deck will lose games that it doesn't get set up. I mean, that's really like its biggest issue, is if you just don't get off and running. I only had maybe 1 or maybe 2 games out of the whole weekend, both days of competition all the way to top 4, that I dead drew. I think it was only 1 game that I dead drew, and it was my 1 loss during Swiss was to Vika Bulu. I dead drew game 3, started a supportless hand, and just pass, and lost. Now, I attribute a lot of that to just having 2 copies of Tapu Lele. Excellent. There was a lot of games where I ended up using both copies of them, and it can make for games where you just decide you want to go very aggressive. You're going to go for that early Guzma to get that knuckle impact on a bench threat and just try to wipe your opponent off the board from there. I think Tapu Lele just increases your access to Guzma. I never used Energy Drive. I never put, fighting energy on this thing throughout the course of the tournament. I might have retreated manually after a Guzma or something like that, but I never tried to Energy Drive with this thing. These guys are purely here just to be able to grab your supporters, especially for the first turn. So many times start an awkward hand full of energy and max elixirs and nothing else, and I would just need to Ultra Ball for Lele, Wonder Tag N, and just start a new hand, and the game would go fine from there. So this thing literally just to dig you out of those dead hands early, and just to make sure that you can hit that N, hit that Guzma when you need it later in the game. Octillery usually helps you draw into those cards that you need, but sometimes you need to go the extra mile and just Wonder Tag for it the old-fashioned way. So that's it for the Pokemon. Let's go ahead and move on to the supporters. The supporters are my favorite part of this deck, since it is just 4 copies of Sycamore, 4 copies of N, and 4 copies of Guzma. I did see some lists cutting down on their copies of Guzma. I think 4 is so essential because it's not it doesn't just make the deck aggressive. It doesn't just mean that I could go turn 1 and jet punch whatever target I want, which is insanely important. It's so good. But it also means that once I start knuckle impacting, I'm going to be able to find that switching card. We don't play any other copies of switch, in the deck. We have Floatstone, which gives us free retreat, but a lot of times you have 3 energy on a Buzzwole and maybe just 1 energy elsewhere, and you want to knuckle impact again. So you're going to Guzma into a Floatstone Pokemon retreat and knuckle impact with that same Buzzwole GX again, and Guzma is the card that lets you do that. So 4 copies of Guzma, so essential. There were some times where I was looking, and all I needed was a game-winning Guzma just to be able to bring up something on the opponent's bench to be able to knuckle impact it for game, and the Guzma was always in deck. I cannot tell you how many games were won or lost or tied because I either found the game-winning Guzma or I did not find the game-winning Guzma. 4 copies to me is a must-have. Then 4 copies of N, 4 copies of Sycamore is just, the backbone of the draw for this deck. Pretty much once you set up your Octillery and you feel confident about it, then the supporters aren't as important. You won't find yourself using Sycamore as often unless you need to really just dig through your deck and you're like, I need to hit a strong and a choice band to be able to win the game. Then that's going to be your Sycamore turn. But most of the time throughout the course of the game, once you set up Octillery, you're going to be using Guzma and N to limit your opponent's resources, Guzma to bring up things and target them down specifically. Moving on to the items, we play 4 copies of Ultra Ball, 4 copies of Max Elixir, 3 copies of Floatstone, 3 copies of Choice Band, 2 copies of Brooklet Hill, 2 copies of Parallel City, 1 Rescue Stretcher, and 1 Field Blower. So this is very similar to that top 8 list we saw from the European International Championships, except for the stadiums. The stadiums are where I differ from those lists that you might have been seeing previously. Everything else is the same. Old list and Pablo's list were playing 3 copies of Brooklet Hill. I tested pretty extensively with only 2 copies of Brooklet Hill, and the deck drew just fine and set up great. Now, I much more appreciated having the 2 copies of Parallel City. Parallel City was absolutely insane in this deck. I mean, this is the MVP. I said before going into the tournament, at Fort Wayne last year, I played 3 copies of Parallel City in my Yveltal Garbodor deck, and I attribute, that second place finish to playing, Parallel City. Parallel City was just such an underrated card at that tournament. I put a third one into my deck just so that I could be able to hit the Parallel City more often than my opponent early, because a lot of games in that format were decided by who hit the Parallel City first. Now, I decided 2 copies of Parallel City is just fine since almost nobody was playing it, and I think it's just such an underrated card in this format. And it's an underrated card because Zoroark GX is so big. Zoroark GX is the draw for so many decks. I can't tell you how many Zoroark GX decks I played against in this weekend, and Parallel City just limits the amount of Zoroark your opponent can have in play. Now, they're not going to want to be attacking with Zoroark, right? They want to use Zoroark as maybe their draw power. They're going to be playing a Golisopod deck, or maybe they're going to be focusing on Lycanroc since, Zoroark is weak, right? So they're going to be focusing on maybe Lycanroc and Mewtwo as opposed to, attacking with Zoroark. But these decks, Zoroark Lycanroc and Golisopod Zoroark, they need the Zoroark to be able to draw. They don't play that many draw supporters, right? So they do need their Zoroarks in play. However, if you play Parallel City, that very well could mean that the Zoroarks are never going to hit the field, because what you might be doing is you might, use Bloodthirsty Eyes, bring up a Zorua, then Parallel City your opponent, then they have to remove something. And they have to choose, do I remove my draw engine, which is Zoroark, or do I remove my attackers? Especially if they play things like Mr. Mime, that's one more bench spot that they have to really think about. If they play like Coco, the Coco promo, the Golisopod decks, they do not have room for all this stuff on the bench, especially when you're playing Parallel City. So the original reason I put Parallel City in this deck was because I was having trouble with the Decidueye matchup, because Decidueye decks were getting out all these Zoroarks, all these Decidueyes, and with the Zoroarks in play, they could hit whatever they wanted. So Parallel City makes my opponent have to choose, what they want to set up. Do they want to set up their Decidueyes, or do they want to set up their Zoroarks, or do they want to have like a thin line of both? And then when you're taking early aggressive knockouts, it really just puts the pressure on the opponent, and they can feel it very heavily. I had so many opponents, look at me and be like, oh my gosh, when I played Parallel City down, they were not anticipating having to just bump something off of their bench, maybe an attacker with an energy on it, or something they planned on evolving the following turn. Really put my opponents in some compromising situations. Not to mention, Parallel City is just so good against Bridget decks. Turn 1, how many decks are going for Lele Bridget, right? And if opponent goes for a Lele Bridget on turn 1, and you have already gotten the turn 1 Parallel City, which happened for me a lot throughout the course of the tournament, they can only Lele and then Bridget for 2 Pokemon, which is really rough. Even decks like Gardevoir GX, just being able to stick them with the Parallel City means they're not going to be able to build up a bunch of Gardevoir, since they're going to need a bench spot for Octillery. They're going to want a bench spot for maybe Sylveon GX, or maybe they have a Vulpix in the active or something like that. It just really puts the pressure on the opponent and really, really limits their options. I think Parallel City is a must-have in this deck. I would not play this deck without it. It is just that good. And then what's cool about it as well is that Lycanroc is a big deal now, right? So not only the blue side, it affects Lycanroc, but then the blue side can affect you as well. You can limit your opponent's Lycanroc plays. You can remove damaged Pokemon from play if you limit your own bench, which can make, it can really fix up your board position very well. So I loved it for that. I loved it versus Volcanion. Being able to stick Volcanion with the red side is so good. I played against 2 Volcanion decks, beat them both. I made it very difficult for them to knock out my Buzzwoles. The difference between 190 and 210 is a whole steam up. So when you stick them with the red side, they have to hit one more steam up to be able to knock you out, which is very hard hard for them to do. A lot of times hitting 2 steam up for a Volcanion deck is very easy. Hitting 3 steam up is a much more difficult task. So Parallel City was an all-star of this deck. Love it, love it, love it in here. Now, as for the rest of the items and trainer cards go, we do have 4 copies of Ultra Ball. Obviously very good just for being able to search out the Pokemon in your deck. You'd have 2 different stage 1s, so it is very essential that you do have some Pokemon search in here. But we also have Brooklet Hill. So Brooklet Hill helps us get our basics into play. A lot of times you're going to be going for that Remoraid early, or maybe just getting a turn 1 Buzzwole because I have a Sycamore with 2 max elixirs and I started a Lele or something like that. So I'll have Brooklet Hill, grab the Buzzwole, max elixir to it twice, excellent. Something like that. Brooklet Hill, awesome for getting those basics into play. Ultra Ball, great for getting your evolutions or just whatever, your Lele, and great for thinning down your hand so that you can Abyssal Hand for more cards. I really loved it for that as well. And it is just the, really the only card in your deck that can really limit your hand size down if you happen to have just a handful of supporters or unplayable cards. Ultra Ball, you could get rid of your extra stadiums, which is excellent. And sometimes, you're going to want your parallel to stick, so you're done with the Brooklets. You've set up already. You're going to Ultra Ball your Brooklets away, maybe some other supporters that you don't really need in search of a Guzma with Abyssal Hand or something like that. 3 copies of Floatstone, also amazing in this deck. You really want mobility in this thing. Since Guzma is such a big card and we don't have any natural free retreaters, you're going to want to play Floatstone. And 3 copies of Floatstone, like I said earlier, really helps you to get that Buzzwole into the active position early so that the deck can be aggressive. Also great just for that Guzma target, like I said. So 3 copies, I really felt comfortable with that. I would not cut any less. I loved having that option for mobility. 3 copies of Choice Band was just right as well. It's not always needed. A lot of times Knuckle Impact will do the damage that you need to, especially if you've softened things up with Jet Punch early. But Choice Band does help you hit some magic numbers when you're talking about hitting 210 just right. Sometimes you maybe only have 3 basic energy on a Buzzwole or something like that, just because you weren't able to find your strongs or just is the way that it happens to be. The Choice Band can get you to that 190. You can knock out a Buzzwole clean, with no strong energy on it using Choice Band. So that's excellent. Also, a lot of times your Buzzwole might just have 1 strong energy on it, meaning that they're hitting 180. Choice Band can bring that all the way up to 210 so that you're knocking out things like Golisopod GX. So just very important. You can also knock out an opposing Buzzwole GX using Choice Band and a strong energy, or Choice Band and a Regirock. So the Choice Band really does fix your numbers when you're going for those bigger Pokemon to knock out versus Pokemon with bigger, a lot more hit points like Guardy and stuff like that. A lot of times you will be softening up with Jet Punch early, so that a lot of times, you're not attacking into a Pokemon that has a full 230 hit points. You're probably attacking into Pokemon with more like 200 or 210, which is much more manageable. That being said, you can hit that big crazy number when you need to, especially using Lycanroc GX. If your opponent has 4 bench Pokemon, like I said, Choice Band, strong energy, you're going to be hitting those upper 200 numbers that you need to hit versus some decks. So Choice Band, very good. I don't think a 4th is necessary, but 3 is very good. I do like Rescue Stretcher in here. I did consider Super Rod for a while and actually tested Super Rod, but Rescue Stretcher is essential for being able to just get that Lycanroc GX back on the turn you want it to be able to Bloodthirsty Eyes when you want to. And that's what Rescue Stretcher was used for the most in this deck, was either just to grab a Lele out the discard pile for a game-winning supporter, or to be able to grab a Lycanroc out the discard pile for a game-winning Bloodthirsty Eyes. That's what I used Rescue Stretcher for the most, and I really loved it for that. I never really found myself in energy drought. 9 energy is a lot of basic energy, especially with your 4 strong energy. It was plenty, really, so long as you don't hit like some crazy awkward Sycamore or something like that. Most of the time, I was totally fine with 9 copies of basic energy. That is a lot of basic energy. And then 1 Field Blower is nice for just being able to remove stadiums here and there, even though we do have 4 stadiums. I love the interaction between Brooklet Hill and Parallel City, just that you can counter your own Parallel City in case you want to Parallel City again and do it the reverse side later in the game. So since we do have all these options to remove stadiums, we can play both sides of Parallel City reasonably in one game, and I really like that too. Field Blower is just very good for removing Choice Bands and things like that. I feel like you do need that option just to be able to remove Choice Bands, especially from like Mewtwo, which is just so annoying with a Choice Band on it. And since those decks with Mewtwo. You know, we're talking about Golisopod, Zoroark, you know, Lycanroc Zoroark. A lot of them only play 2 copies of Choice Band. So if you can bump it with Field Blower, then, you know, a lot of times they will have a hard time finding that Choice Band again. They'll either have to double puzzle for it or something like that. So 1 copy of Field Blower, love it for moving stadiums, love it for moving Fury Belts and things like that from Volcanion, just to bring them back into the realm of a normal amount of hit points is very good. Do love the 1 Field Blower in here. And then for Max Elixir, obviously, this is just the juice of our deck, being able to build up huge Buzzwole GXs out of nowhere. I had some games where I just hit 3 Max Elixir in 1 turn on a bench Buzzwole, and my opponent would just be shaking their head like, oh my gosh, like how many energy does he play? Apparently Michael Pramawat was just trying to guess how many fighting I played in my deck, because he was joking that I hit them so often. He thought that I must play 11 fighting. I don't. I'm playing 9. I just happened to get very fortunate sometimes with my Max Elixir plays throughout the course of the weekend. They were going very well for me, so I do love Max Elixir. I mean, at this point, you know, Max Elixir, you know, last year in that deck at Fort Wayne, just being able to use it for Yveltal was so good. Max Elixir returning again here for me, just in the form of a fighting deck, you know, also just such a good card for powering up these big basic Pokemon. You know, love it. I understand, you know, how this acceleration engine very well. It just, you know, works for me. I can wrap my mind around it, and, you know, just being able to kind of play the odds too, counting how many fighting in your deck, knowing when to take the chance with Max Elixir, when to end it back in, is a little bit of, you know, some skill that takes place in the game too. Max Elixir is not a card that you just play every time you see it. Sometimes if you've drawn into a couple copies of fighting energy, you might decide to end it back in and try again later, or you might just decide that you don't want to Max Elixir to something. If you Sycamore into a hand with N in Max Elixir, or another Sycamore in Max Elixir, you might wait till the following turn to play it, just to see what your opponent does, so that you can then pivot to where you want to go with your benched field. So I do think Max Elixir is just such a good card. Obviously very good when paired with Buzzwole, just being able to build up those big attacks. Absorption GX as well. Forgot to mention Absorption GX. Absorption GX, just so good. I did use it a few times. I didn't use it quite as often as I used Lycanroc GX Dangerous Rogue, but there were some games where the Dangerous Rogue was just not an option, especially versus Golisopod decks. You're not really going to be going for Dangerous Rogue. You're going to be setting up that early Absorption GX, and then just going from there. So Absorption, very good attack on Buzzwole too, just being able to hit some huge damage. And finally, to wrap things up, we do play 9 copies of fighting. Like I said, I did get to play these awesome Wizards of the Coast promo fightings. These are my friend Natalie. She let me borrow them for the tournament, so really did like that. And then 4 copies of Strong Energy. Basic fighting energy, obviously, I think 9 is just the magic number for Max Elixirs. You know, you don't want to play any less than 9, or else your percentage for hitting really starts to drop off. You could play like 10 or 11. I actually considered, before I put the Parallel Cities in, I was considering adding in another copy of Fighting Energy. When I was considering dropping the 4th Buzzwole, I considered adding another copy of Fighting Energy too, just because hitting your Max Elixirs is just a huge part of playing this deck and doing well with it. But 9 copies, you know, is worked just fine, and I don't think that you need to add a 10th one. And I'm not sure that you're going to be getting the maximum return on a 10th Fighting Energy. You know, you're not going to be seeing a huge difference in the amount that you hit until you add maybe the 11th or the 12th Fighting Energy. And then Strong Energy, obviously very good, boosting your damage output, and just making you hit those numbers that you need to. So that's it for my Buzzwole Lycanroc GX deck profile. Thank you all for watching the video. Let me know what you guys think of this deck in the comments below. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Peace.